In Washington, D.C., a gardener named Chance lived on a large estate owned by an old man named Mr. Jennings. For years, Chance's life had revolved only around that place. Since he was a child, Chance had been brought there and had almost never left the estate grounds. The outside world felt foreign to him, like something that only existed on the television screen. Every day, most of his time was spent watching TV. That was where Chance learned many things, from how people spoke, to the news, entertainment shows, and even simple habits that Chance copied without really understanding them. Television became his only window to the world. In that big house, besides Mr. Jennings, there was only Louise, the cook who had worked there for a long time. Louise had known Chance since he was little and was the only person truly used to his behavior.
Yes, please. I'm very hungry, Louise.
I'll make you some eggs.
One morning, Chance woke up and lay in bed for a while before starting his day as usual. After getting ready, Chance turned on the television and dusted his room while listening to the song playing on TV. Occasionally, Chance moved along with the music rhythm casually. Not long after, Chance sat down and watched cartoons with an innocent expression like a child who truly enjoyed what he saw. After getting bored, Chance started flipping channels aimlessly. After that, Chance went to the dining room, turned on the television again, and sat quietly while waiting for Louise to prepare breakfast. When Louise arrived looking upset and emotional, Chance just stared at her without much reaction. Chance didn't really understand why she was angry. Louise finally realized that talking seriously to Chance wouldn't help much. Her emotions slowly calmed down. Then Louise apologized and offered eggs for breakfast. Chance accepted it calmly.
I'll make you some eggs.
Yes, please. I'm very hungry, Louise.
After finishing eating while watching TV, Chance went upstairs to see Mr. Jennings. When he entered the room, Chance saw the old man's body already covered with a sheet. Slowly, Chance lifted part of the covering and calmly touched Mr. Jennings' forehead. Chance stared at the lifeless body for several minutes without showing any clear panic or sadness. After that, Chance sat beside the bed, unsure what to do. Because he didn't know how to handle the situation, Chance instead turned on the television in the room and started watching commercials as usual. A few moments later, while changing channels, Chance heard a greeting from someone on TV. Chance immediately repeated the sentence and the gesture over and over, practicing it until it felt right to him.
I won't have the horses stand in the sun, you hear me? Keep your hat and gloves on. And your coat buttoned. Stay in your seat.
After that, Chance left the room casually, put on his work boots and apron to protect his jacket, and went to the garden. That was where Chance felt most comfortable. Like every other morning, Chance tended to the plants with great care. Gardening seemed to be the only thing Chance truly understood. Even though he had just lost the person who had taken care of him all this time, Chance still looked calm and didn't change much. A few minutes later, Louise approached him. Chance immediately tried out the new greeting he had just learned from television. He said it seriously as if it were something important. However, Louise was talking about something much bigger. Unfortunately, Chance didn't understand what she meant at all. Chance just stood there quietly while watching Louise walk away and leave him. Casually, Chance said goodbye like someone who was sure the person would come back soon. After finishing his work in the garden, Chance went back inside the house and saw that most of the furniture was already covered with white sheets. Even though the atmosphere felt different, Chance still didn't understand how serious the situation really was. Chance instead uncovered the television, then sat down and calmly watched a quiz show. Not long after, Chance switched to the news channel. On the screen, the President of the United States was formally welcoming foreign officials. Chance watched seriously, then started imitating their gestures and greetings multiple times, as if he were learning how to become part of the world he had only seen through television. A few minutes later, two inheritance lawyers named Thomas and Sally arrived at the big house to handle Mr. Jennings' estate.
The garden? Yes. Are you waiting for someone?
Thomas and Sally then introduced themselves to Chance. Hearing that, Chance immediately gave a formal handshake that he had just learned from television. After that, without feeling anything strange, Chance went back to staring at the TV screen. The two lawyers looked confused and surprised.
Are you waiting for someone?
Yes, Thomas, I understand.
They explained that according to the records, there had been no other workers on the estate for decades except for a stonemason who once repaired the house wall years ago. Chance didn't argue with them. Casually, he He instead invited Thomas and Sally to tour the house. Chance showed them the section of the wall that the stonemason had repaired years ago, and he even still remembered details about the man. The way Chance spoke made it seem like he truly knew every corner of the house. After that, Chance took them to Mr. Jennings' garage, as if to prove that he had indeed lived there all this time. Chance then took them to his own room. There, he explained innocently that Mr. Jennings had once introduced him to television and given him his own TV to watch every day. With pride, Chance showed them his TV remote and demonstrated how to use it, as if it were something very important.
That city's history.
They have not been too lucky, actually.
Chance also showed them the bathroom, the closet full of Mr. Jennings' vintage clothes that he was allowed to wear, and even his own bed. Thomas and Sally just looked at each other, unsure how to respond. The situation felt strange because Chance seemed like someone living in his own small world. Finally, Thomas decided to get straight to the main point. Carefully, Thomas explained that although Chance had indeed lived in the house for many years, the estate was now officially being closed. Because of that, Chance was given time until noon tomorrow to leave the house. Chance stayed quiet as he listened to the explanation. His expression remained flat, as if he still didn't really understand what all of it meant for his life. Before leaving, Sally tried to find out more about Chance. Sally asked if he had any medical records, a personal doctor, or even a dentist. But Sally was surprised to learn that Chance had never been to a hospital in his entire life. Feeling confused and sorry, Thomas and Sally finally said goodbye and left the house. Chance gave them another formal handshake that he had practiced many times before.
Yes.
Mr. Chance.
After the house became quiet again, he went up to the attic to get his old suitcase. While still watching television, he started packing all his belongings into one small suitcase. His simple life turned out to consist of very few things. After finishing, he grabbed an umbrella, then sat for a moment flipping through the TV channels one last time before finally turning it off. He walked toward the front door but stopped for a while. He stood silently for quite some time, looking at the street from behind the window. His face looked hesitant and scared. The outside world was something he had barely touched for decades. Finally, after gathering his courage, he opened the door and stepped out of the house for the first time since he was a child. With slow steps, he walked down the stairs to the sidewalk. Even though he looked like he wanted to go back inside, he kept walking without any clear destination. Throughout the journey, he observed the city around him with a confused yet curious gaze. The busy streets, the sound of vehicles, and the people passing by felt like a new world he had only seen on the television screen. After walking quite far, he began trying to adapt to the outside world he had never really known. When he was about to cross the street, he did it carefully while watching his surroundings. On the side of the road, he saw a group of boys hanging out. He gave them a small formal greeting from a distance, the way he had learned from television, then continued on without saying anything else. Not long after, he came across another group of kids playing basketball. He stopped and stood there for quite a while just to watch them play. His eyes were full of curiosity, like someone seeing something very interesting for the first time. 4 hours, he kept walking aimlessly through the busy city. Everything looked new to him. At one street corner, he approached a woman. But the woman quickly moved away when she saw him coming closer. Confused, he immediately left without trying to understand what had just happened. A few moments later, he met another group of boys. This time the situation was different. One of the kids looked angry and started threatening him with a small knife.
Out the seeds for the spring and work the soil.
Boy, check it out. Come on.
He himself had no idea how to react to such a threat. Innocently, he instead took out the TV remote from his pocket and started pressing the buttons toward the boy, as if trying to change a TV channel he didn't like. Of course, nothing happened. The kids burst out laughing and mocked his strange, nonsensical behavior. Even so, he just walked away without getting too angry or scared. He continued walking for several more hours. Along the way, he saw a statue of a man pointing to the right. He seriously observed the statue for a few seconds before turning right, as if the statue was really giving him directions. Some time later, he spotted a dead tree in the distance. He immediately approached it with a worried face and examined it with great care, like a gardener sad to see a damaged plant. Shortly after, He approached a police officer but didn't have any real conversation.
Thank you. Day, sir.
Because he was too busy observing everything around him, he didn't even realize he had walked into the middle of the road several times. Night was starting to fall when he passed an electronics store. In the store window, a TV screen was showing a live camera feed. For the first time in his life, he saw himself appear on the TV screen. He froze. With great curiosity, he walked back and forth in front of the screen, trying to understand how he could be inside the television. He even took out the remote and tried pressing buttons to turn off his own image. But of course it didn't work. While he was busy staring at the screen, he unconsciously stepped off the sidewalk into the road. A few seconds later, a limousine hit him. Luckily, the impact wasn't too serious. One of the limousine drivers named David immediately got out of the car in panic. David was the personal driver for Eve Rand, the wife of a wealthy businessman named Ben Rand. Feeling guilty, David quickly checked on him and suggested taking him to the hospital. Eve, who also got out of the car, looked quite calm and friendly. Her attitude made him feel a little relieved, even though he kept apologizing for the incident. He was then invited into the limousine. At first he seemed hesitant because he had never ridden such a fancy car before. He even stopped in front of the car door until the other driver reassured him that everything was fine.
I understand. Very good.
Finally, he sat in the back seat with Eve while his small suitcase was put in the trunk. During the ride, Eve asked the driver to call the house first to let the staff know they were coming with an injured guest. Eve then offered him a drink, and he accepted it calmly.
Thank you.
Curious about the strange man they had just met, Eve started asking about his name. But his response only confused and amused her. He was busy emptying his pockets looking for his TV remote. Once he found it, he immediately turned on the TV inside the car and started flipping channels like he always did.
When they unwrap the chopsticks to be upset.
When a cartoon appeared on the screen, his attention was completely focused on the show. He watched it seriously and enjoyed the cartoon story, unaware that Eve kept watching him with a puzzled look. Not long after, they arrived at the Rand family's large house. As soon as the car entered the gate, several staff members were already waiting at the main door with a wheelchair for him. Eve then asked one of the staff named Wilson to take him to the guest room upstairs and immediately call their family doctor. Wilson helped him sit in the wheelchair and took him up using a small elevator to the guest room. Shortly after, the Rand family doctor arrived. His name was Dr. Robert. Dr. Robert immediately examined him. When the doctor was about to give him an injection, he casually said that he had seen that kind of procedure on television. His innocent comment made Dr. Robert smile in amusement. After giving the injection, the doctor decided to do an X-ray on his leg to make sure there were no serious injuries from the accident. However, while the doctor was explaining his medical condition, his attention shifted back to the television in the room.
Well then.
He was busy flipping channels while only half listening to the doctor's explanation.
Yes, but could cause trouble later on.
Meanwhile, in another part of the big house, Eve met her husband, Ben Rand, who was lying sick in his room. Ben greeted Eve warmly, then suggested that he join them for dinner that night. Eve agreed and started preparing everything.
Why don't you ask this Robinson for dinner?
You think you're well enough for dinner, Ben?
Constance.
Yes, sir.
At the same time, Dr. Robert met with Eve to explain his condition, while Wilson pushed his wheelchair toward the examination room at Rand Memorial Hospital for the X-ray.
So I suggested that he stay here for a couple of days. Don't worry, he might be a breath of fresh air.
A few moments later, in the Rand family's private care room, he finally met Ben Rand in person. Ben welcomed him warmly and immediately noticed how he looked around the room with curiosity. The room felt different because it was filled with extra oxygen to help with Ben's health condition. Casually, Ben explained that he had deliberately set up his room like that so his body would feel fresher and help him stay strong against the illness he was suffering from. Not long after, Ben started speaking more openly about his condition. Ben said that he was seriously ill and probably wouldn't live much longer. Even though he was talking about something serious, Ben said it in a calm tone, as if he had already accepted the reality.
So am I, my boy.
After that, Ben invited him to have dinner together. He immediately accepted the invitation happily and honestly said that he was really hungry. After the examination was finished, he joined Ben, Eve, and Dr. Robert for dinner together at the Rand family's big house. During dinner, Ben tried to get to know him better. Ben felt the man was different from the people he usually met. Chance's way of speaking sounded simple, but to Ben, those words actually sounded full of meaning. Ben even started to see him as a businessman or an experienced man who deliberately spoke in a calm and symbolic way. In reality, he was just explaining his life as it was, with no hidden intentions. Even so, Ben seemed more and more interested in every answer he gave.
Yeah, well, isn't that what any businessman is? With the sweat of his own brow, who makes a thing of value.
After dinner ended, Ben and he still spent time together chatting casually, while Dr. Robert just watched their interaction with confusion.
Inflation.
I will, Ben. Yes.
Not long after, Wilson came with a wheelchair to take him back to his room. When they entered the elevator, Wilson suddenly chuckled softly as if holding back laughter. Wilson thought he had deliberately made weird jokes during dinner earlier. But after seeing his serious and innocent expression, Wilson immediately apologized for his reaction. While Wilson was pushing the wheelchair toward the room, Eve approached him. In a warm tone, Eve said that she was glad he was in the house. Even though she had initially felt confused by the presence of the stranger, now Eve actually felt comfortable seeing him near Ben.
Thank you, Eve.
Good night, Chauncey.
The next morning, the Rand house became busy. Several Secret Service members arrived early to conduct security checks and prepare for the arrival of an important guest. At the same time, he intended to go out to see the garden because it was the only place that always made him feel calm. But as soon as he stepped out, a house staff member approached him and asked if he wanted a car prepared. Hearing the offer, he immediately nodded enthusiastically and politely thanked them. Before he could go far, Dr. Robert came hurriedly with Wilson. The doctor gently scolded him for moving around too much when his condition hadn't fully recovered yet. After that, he was seated back in the wheelchair for examination. Dr. Robert then checked the wound on his leg and felt relieved because the swelling had started to go down and the healing process was going quite well. During the examination, the doctor also gave him news about what was happening that day. Dr. Robert explained that the President of the United States would be coming and had even offered to replace Ben at an important convention because of his health condition.
Well, I'm sure someone will have the time. You're meeting the president, aren't you?
A few moments later, after everything was done, he went back inside the house and started preparing to welcome the president's arrival. While waiting for Ben to appear, he sat down and tried to turn on the television in the room. But this time, whether because he was confused by the buttons or the different system, he couldn't get it to work at all. A few moments later, Ben finally came out of his room looking neat and ready to welcome the president. The nurses had helped with his makeup and outfit so Ben would look fresh in front of the important guest.
I didn't want the president to think I was...
Even though his body looked weak, Ben still tried to maintain his appearance. When he met him, Ben lightly joked and praised his nurses, saying they had done a really good job preparing him that morning. While waiting for the president's arrival, Ben and he chatted casually as usual. On the other side of the house, Dr. Robert was becoming more and more curious about him. In his opinion, the man was very strange and different from anyone Dr. Robert had ever met. Seeing him busy with Ben, Dr. Robert took the opportunity to secretly enter the guest room where he was staying. There, Dr. Robert tried to find out more about the mysterious man by checking his belongings. But what the doctor found was very simple. There were no important documents, no signs of a luxurious life, just a small suitcase containing ordinary clothes and personal items. Right around 10 o'clock in the morning, the president's entourage started arriving at the Rand family residence. Several security officers and staff entered the house area first before the President of the United States finally arrived. Ben asked him to wait in the library where the meeting would be held. Even though his body was weak, Ben still insisted on standing up from the wheelchair. With all the strength he had left, Ben walked slowly toward the library because he wanted to welcome the president in person with full respect. Throughout the walk to the room, Ben kept talking with him and sharing more about his life.
I've remained honest to myself. Oh.
Not long after, they entered the library where the president was already waiting. As soon as he saw Ben coming, the president immediately greeted his old friend warmly. The two of them chatted casually and exchanged compliments like two influential people who had known each other for a long time.
Your visit has helped to raise my spirits.
After sitting down, Ben proudly introduced him to the president. He immediately extended his hand with the formal style he had learned from television, exactly like the way the president shook hands when appearing on the news. The president looked a bit surprised, but still welcomed him kindly. At first, the president tried to start a serious conversation with Ben about the economic situation and some other important matters. However, several times he unconsciously interrupted the conversation with simple comments that he thought were completely ordinary. Even though they sounded innocent, his words started to be seen as having deep meaning by the people in the room. As the conversation continued, he gave simple opinions based on things he understood from gardening and changing seasons. Strangely, the president and the other guests interpreted them as smart and philosophical economic views. Ben looked very proud hearing him speak. With a happy face, Ben even clapped for his new friend.
In a very, very long time.
The atmosphere of the meeting slowly became much more relaxed and warm. In the end, the president felt quite satisfied with the results of their discussion that day. After the conversation ended, the president said goodbye and left the Rand family house with a very good impression of him.
This is a time to think of life. Chauncey?
Bobby?
After escorting the president out of the library, Ben and he still talked excitedly about the meeting earlier. Both of them praised the president's polite attitude and felt happy because their conversation had gone so smoothly. Meanwhile, the president's entourage immediately left the Rand family house to continue the next agenda. As he walked out of the library, Ben's face looked very bright. He recalled the interesting conversation he had with him the night before. But not long after, Ben admitted he was starting to feel tired after a very busy and exhausting day. He then asked permission to rest.
Now, Chauncey, I'm afraid I must excuse.
On the same day, as Ben requested, Eve took him on a tour around the Rand family's big house area. They walked through the large garden to the family's private greenhouse. Throughout the walk, Eve secretly observed how he looked so fascinated seeing the plants and the surroundings. His gaze turned warm every time he saw plants, as if he felt far more comfortable near the garden than in the middle of conversations with rich and influential people. Not long after, Eve, he, and Dr. Robert gathered in Ben's room to watch the president's speech on television. When the president started speaking, everyone in the room listened seriously. Ben looked very enthusiastic, especially when some of the president's words sounded similar to things he had discussed earlier. But that warm atmosphere didn't last long. The fatigue from the day's activities started affecting Ben's condition. Suddenly his body weakened and he fell ill in front of them. Dr. Robert immediately moved quickly with the nurses to stabilize Ben. The situation in the room suddenly became tense. The doctor then asked Eve and him to leave the room so they wouldn't have to witness the rather heavy medical treatment.
So I'm going to rethink my... And you'll be very...
Outside the room, Eve looked very worried thinking about her husband's condition. He stayed with Eve while waiting for the latest news about Ben. Even though he didn't talk much, his presence actually made Eve feel a little calmer. In the middle of that atmosphere, a secretary called him because there was a phone call for him. He just stood silent for a few moments without moving. Eve, who was emotional, thought his silence showed that he really cared about Ben and her. Finally, Eve urged him to take the call right away.
Go, Chauncey. I'll be just fine.
As he walked away, he stepped lightly and cheerfully, almost like a child excitedly going to play. Dr. Robert, who saw it, just watched in confusion. While talking on the phone with an editor, his attention suddenly shifted to a television show nearby. On the screen, a yoga instructor was calmly doing various body movements. He immediately became fixated on it. While still answering the phone questions half-heartedly, he started imitating the yoga movements he saw on TV. Over time, he even forgot that he was still on the phone. Finally, he just hung up and fully focused on following the movements on the television screen.
Hello, Mr. Hull. Yes, the show will be taped.
Elsewhere, the president received the background check results on him that intelligence agencies had begun conducting. Meanwhile, he himself was being taken to Gary Burns' television show after his name started attracting public attention. Upon arriving at the studio, he was immediately escorted backstage to be made up and prepared before the interview began. The show staff tried to give him various instructions on how to behave in front of the camera, even though he didn't really seem to understand all of it. Not long after, he was called up to the stage. When the interview started, Gary Burns immediately discussed his figure who had suddenly become the center of attention. With great curiosity, Gary asked how someone considered so close to the president could live anonymously for many years. Gary also asked for his opinion on the country's current economic strategy. As usual, he answered calmly and simply. He started talking about gardening, about seasons, plants, and how a gardener must be patient in facing changing weather. For him, that was just ordinary things he truly understood. However, for everyone who heard it, those words sounded like very deep and meaningful economic metaphors. Even the president, who was watching the interview, stopped his activities for a moment just to listen to what he would say next.
It is surprising.
And quoted you.
And if you give your garden...
After the show ended, he was driven back by car. During the ride, he turned on the television and saw himself appearing on the news screen along with all the discussion about his interview. Meanwhile, Ben and Eve sat together in the room watching the same broadcast with great pride. They felt lucky to know him, a simple man who was now considered a genius by many people. In the middle of that atmosphere, Ben suddenly asked Eve how she felt about him. Ben looked relieved when he learned that Eve also liked having the man in their house. But unlike Ben and Eve, Dr. Robert still viewed everything with full suspicion and skepticism.
And there is...
Elsewhere, Thomas was watching the television show featuring him. Thomas couldn't believe what he was seeing. His girlfriend even looked very impressed with him after the interview ended. That made Thomas even more confused because the figure on TV felt very different from the quiet and strange man he had kicked out of the estate house a few days earlier. According to Thomas, he used to look like someone who even had trouble understanding ordinary conversation. But now, the whole country considered him a smart and influential figure. On the other side of the city, Louise was also watching the show from her house. Because she had known him for decades, Louise was probably the only person who truly understood what he was really like. That was why she looked very shocked seeing everyone praising him as if he were a great thinker. Louise could only sit silently while watching how society easily became fascinated by someone just from the way he spoke and his outer appearance. Meanwhile, back at the Rand family house, he returned after the television show ended. As soon as he entered the house, he was warmly welcomed by the staff who now started to admire him like an important figure. He himself acted as usual. He went inside and met again with Ben, Eve, and Dr. Robert, who also greeted him kindly. After that, Eve started talking about the next social events he would attend. They discussed suitable clothes and appearance for him. A few days later, media attention on him grew even bigger. His name started appearing in various news and television shows. Because of that situation, Thomas and Sally met again to discuss the mysterious man.
Well...
I forgot, Joanna is starting to think...
At the White House, intelligence agents were also starting to get frustrated. They had tried to search for his background from various sources but found almost nothing. To them, he felt like someone who had suddenly appeared without any clear past. The lack of information only made many people more curious. At the Rand family house, Eve came full of enthusiasm to deliver good news to him. But when she found him sitting casually, Eve suddenly looked nervous herself. She went silent for a few minutes because she didn't know what to say. After that, Eve suddenly thanked him because she thought he had been strong enough to hold back his feelings all this time. He just stared at Eve with a blank expression because he didn't understand what she meant at all.
I would have just...
While Eve slowly left the room with mixed feelings, he remained sitting quietly as usual. Unlike other people who were starting to become fascinated by him, Dr. Robert became even more suspicious. Secretly, he called Thomas's office and left a message along with a phone number because he wanted to discuss his past more deeply. A few nights later, Ben's condition looked increasingly weak. Meanwhile, he escorted Eve to an official event filled with many important guests and journalists. As soon as they arrived, the reporters immediately approached him and started throwing various questions about the president's speech and the current political situation. Even though he didn't really understand the situation, he still looked calm facing the media crowd. Eve watched all of it with admiration. In her opinion, he had an incredibly calm and elegant attitude when facing public attention.
Well, you have a nice chat.
Not long after, he was introduced to the Russian ambassador who was present at the event. They then sat close together at the same table to chat. On the other side of the party, the intelligence agents gathered again to discuss him. They started wondering whether the man was deliberately hiding his past or perhaps had a criminal history that had been completely erased. Meanwhile, in order to find a definite answer, Dr. Robert finally met Thomas in person to discuss him. Thomas then explained that he was just a simple gardener who had lived on the estate since he was a child. At the party table, the Russian ambassador started trying to get to know him better. Because he often stayed quiet and only smiled, the ambassador instead considered that attitude as a sign that he understood their conversation. Finally, the ambassador started speaking in Russian. He, who didn't understand at all, just laughed softly and nodded politely, making the people around him even more convinced that he truly understood everything.
Expected as much all along.
On the other side of the party room, Thomas and Dr. Robert continued their serious conversation about him. The more they discussed the man's past, the stranger everything felt. Thomas kept explaining that he was actually just a simple gardener who had almost never had contact with the outside world. But strangely, now many important people considered him an extraordinary figure. Meanwhile, Eve approached him again with a proud face. Eve praised how he had managed to impress the Russian ambassador throughout their conversation earlier. According to Eve, the way he behaved looked very elegant and full of confidence. Even when he barely spoke, people still felt drawn to him. He himself just listened without really understanding why everyone was so impressed by him. Not long after, he met someone and immediately greeted them warmly as usual. On the other side of the event, Thomas and Dr. Robert finally finished their conversation. Meanwhile, several senators and important guests started discussing him as well. The man's name was now being talked about more and more often in political circles and among influential people.
Upstairs right now. Is there a TV upstairs?
You wait right here. I'll go get Warren.
At the White House, the situation was also becoming more complicated. While lying in bed with his wife facing marital issues, the president received an important call regarding him. Talk about the mysterious man kept coming up from all directions. But in the middle of all that chaos, he himself had no idea how big an influence he had already created.
I'll be right down.
After the party ended, he went home with Eve calmly like any ordinary day. In the car, Eve started speaking more openly about her feelings. She said that Ben understood her closeness with him and even accepted it calmly. He just listened while looking out the window without giving much reaction. Meanwhile, at the White House, the president held an emergency meeting with the head of the FBI and the head of the CIA. They discussed him seriously because more and more countries were starting to find out who the man really was. Even so, the intelligence agencies still hadn't found any evidence that he was a foreign agent or any specific threat. But that was exactly why they were even more confused.
Is it
Gardner is not a foreign agent. There are now...
At the Rand family house, after finally learning his entire past from Thomas, Dr. Robert decided to meet Ben. The doctor entered the care room and found Ben taking care of his will and settling various final affairs in his life. Carefully, Dr. Robert tried to talk about him. But when he saw how Ben spoke about him with so much affection and admiration, the doctor started to hesitate about telling the truth. For Ben, whose condition was getting worse, he had become a figure who gave him spirit and peace in his final days. Because of that, Dr. Robert finally chose to keep all his findings to himself and not destroy Ben's happiness. In another part of the big house, he was sitting casually in his room watching television. When a movie showed a couple getting close, he immediately imitated the scene with Eve, who was nearby. Eve looked happy receiving that attention and started to feel their relationship getting closer. But a few moments later, the television show changed. As soon as the yoga instructor appeared on the screen, his attention immediately shifted completely to the television. He left Eve just like that and started imitating the yoga movements with great curiosity like a child learning something new. Eve just watched him with a mix of confusion and amusement. Meanwhile, Ben's condition got even worse. As soon as he received the news, Dr. Robert hurried to Ben's room to handle it. But this time, Ben looked truly tired of facing the pain and the non-stop care. Calmly, Ben refused additional medical treatment and asked the doctor to respect his wish to rest without further intervention. Not long after, Ben asked for him to be called to his room. Dr. Robert watched everything in silence as he entered and sat near Ben's bed, which now looked even weaker. With heavy breathing and a soft voice, Ben started speaking to him using language he thought the man would understand. Ben said that Eve was a fragile flower and needed someone to take good care of her. Because of that, Ben asked him to stay with Eve after he was gone. Ben also explained that he had already talked with several business partners and important people around him. According to Ben, many people were very interested in working with him and believed that the man had a great future. He himself just listened calmly without really understanding how serious and important the conversation was. But before Ben could finish all his words or leave a final message for Eve, his body suddenly weakened. Not long after, Ben passed away. The room was immediately filled with silence. For the first time in a long while, he looked truly devastated. His eyes started to water and he slowly cried because he had lost someone who had been so kind to him. Then, just like when Mr. Jennings died before, he reached out and gently touched Ben's forehead as a final goodbye. He stood silently while staring at Ben's lifeless body. Dr. Robert just stood near them without saying anything for a few moments. Finally, the doctor tried to speak to him, but he didn't seem to really understand what was said. Instead, he calmly started talking about the night before the incident, as if he was still trying to process everything in his own way.
And you really are...
God, no.
Not long after, he walked out of the room and left Dr. Robert alone. The doctor watched him leave while muttering softly, as if he was finally starting to understand who the strange man really was. A few days later, Ben's funeral was held solemnly. Many important people attended to pay their last respects. Quotes and messages from Ben were read while the mourners stood silently watching the coffin being carried to its final resting place. In the middle of that sorrowful atmosphere, he stood calmly beside Eve. But after a while, he slowly left the funeral area without drawing anyone's attention. He walked alone toward the snowy forest around the funeral site.
I have met with King.
Meanwhile, near the ceremony area, several important figures started talking about the country's political future. They discussed the next election and potential candidate names who could replace the current president. Strangely, his name started being mentioned in their conversation as someone considered to have great influence. But while people were talking about the strong possibility regarding him, he himself was completely unaware of any of it. He kept walking slowly through the snowy forest with a gloomy face until he finally reached the riverbank. There, he saw a small plant covered by fallen branches. Like his habit as a gardener, he immediately bent down and carefully cleared the branches so the plant could grow well again. In the distance, the sound of quotes from the funeral ceremony could still be heard faintly, saying that life is actually just a state of mind. After that, he stepped toward the surface of the river. Strangely, he walked on the water without sinking at all, as if the river's surface was as solid as regular ground. He even stopped for a moment to check the water's depth using his umbrella. He poked the umbrella into the river and saw that the water was actually quite deep. But even though he realized that, he still stood calmly on the water's surface without looking scared or surprised.